exorcists and support personnel for the past 20 years. Mr. Clement was on the founding committee that formed Pope Leo XIII Institute for the training of exorcists in the U.S. at the request of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. He subsequently taught and formed priests as well as their support teams with the Pope Leo XIII Institute for several years. The society is an order of semi-contemplative exorcist priests and lay assistants that provide formation and consulting services to cardinals, bishops, exorcists, priests, mental health professionals, and law enforcement agencies in the areas of exorcism and extraordinary diabolical activity. The SMD also provides exorcist formation and training for parish priests, mental health professionals, and deliverance teams, following a medical model known as Liber Christo methodology. So it's a great honor and privilege to have him here. Just want to say he has a ranch kind of that he stays at in Texas and one that he has in Wyoming. I've been to the one in Wyoming. He's a genuine cowboy, if you will, with the cattle and the sheep and horses and a huge dog called Shine, which he may or may not tell you about. But it is my great pleasure to introduce Kyle Clement.
Good evening.
Good evening.
And so I had a few questions with regard to some talk titles, if you will. And so wanted to kind of go through those a little bit as a way of starting out our mission. And so, as Father said, I work with exorcists, particularly Father Chad Ripperger, and we do formation for exorcists and what we call general practitioner priests, lay associates, mental health professionals, and we train, that's my job, is to train and instruct those various groups. And so that's a big thing to walk all the way around, but the best way to describe it is if we follow a medical model, the exorcist would be viewed as a specialist, and then the parish priest would be viewed as general practitioner priest, and the mental health professionals would be those that assist them in those efforts. And if you go ahead and use that medical analogy, I'm here as a function of preventative medicine to teach you about the things that you're already doing that you might do a little bit more with more zeal and fervor if you recognize the value, and then some things that we no longer do that we should be doing. And so to that end, there's a series of talks. And so this morning, What is Catholic Identity was the introductory to the understanding often the demon attacks us, the world attacks us, and we are doubtful in ourselves about our identity and our purpose. The specificity with which God creates us, and we are created mission specific. We're not some experiment. We're not some thing to be wound up and then left on our own. We are God's physical agent in the world. We are the agent of charity. We are the agent of salvation. And so if you see that, then you realize that we are created mission specific in the same way that the angels were created mission specific. Everything, for that matter, is created to reflect the glory of God, to give testimony to the glory of God, and to aid in that salvation, that union. God wills a union. And so that was essentially it this morning. These are being recorded. I don't know how they are available to you, but they would be made available to you, these various talks. So tonight we're going to talk about the domestic church. I'm going to come back to that. Tomorrow we're going to talk about, in the morning, tools of the trade. And so you may think, well, what is our trade? Our trade is salvation. Our trade is to work in the economy of salvation. It is to bear witness to Christ. It is to raise souls that know God. It is to raise souls that know their faith, to preserve our faith whole and entire. Tools of the trade is what do we use? What are some of the accoutrements, if you will? What are the things associated with this trade, this business of salvation? And I don't want to give away too much of the topic. I'm hoping to pique your interest. And then the tomorrow evening, the cleaning out your knapsack is essentially what are the things that are essential? What are the necessities, not the luxuries? What is necessary for our salvation? And what are the things that we have accumulated along the way that will weigh us down? What is the gold in our pockets that we find ourselves neck deep in the river? What are those things we've got to get rid of? What are those things that we have placed a value on that have no eternal consequence or no eternal value? So as St. Ignatius would say, what are the things of attachment? If the angel tapped you on the shoulder tonight and said, tonight's the night, what would you say? So then the next one starts on Wednesday morning, a balanced relationship with the Trinity. We as Catholics have a different relationship with the three persons of the Holy Trinity, individually and collectively. So that ought to be enough of a tease to get you there for that talk. Liturgical seasons and natural seasons. And so through the undulations of the cosmos and the regulation of daylight, the variations in the seasons, all of these things bear into us as humans as part of our temporal existence. And so they can be used in ways in the liturgy, especially the older liturgy, used to draw us into that. So when I mention liturgy, I'm not just talking about the Mass. It's all the prayers and works of the people. So we used to have a lot more agrarian base. We used to be a lot closer to our food. We used to be a lot closer to the earth. And in doing so, we were a lot closer to God. So we find ourselves somewhat removed modernly. The next one is the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass. To go into the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass, to see many of the elements of Mass that would give us some tools in focusing on the Mass and focusing on ways to purify the senses, ways to build up our spiritual health, if you will, through the Mass. And then that last one on Friday morning is demons go where they are not resisted, angels go where they are invited. And so as we navigate this world, as we navigate our life's existence, to be able to recognize an angelic paradigm versus a diabolical paradigm. When are we the most vulnerable? When are our institutions the most vulnerable? So there's a quick synopsis, run through of the talks, a preview, if you will, of the week. And so let's talk tonight about domestic church. So I'd like for these to be somewhat interactive. Also, did anyone get a watch for Christmas? No one? Does anyone have a reliable watch? Great. Would someone tell me when it is 10 minutes after 7? And you can do it by waving. And then we'll start a question and answer or a discussion period. So I'll go for a while, and then we will get into some questions and answers. But by show of hands, if I use the term domestic church, how many of you have heard that term before? Great. So the domestic church is something that we don't talk about so much. When was the last time you heard it in a homily? Not to put Father on the spot. So it's not something that is in the front of our mind, so to speak, but it should be. For instance, how many of you are a member of a family? And it should be all hands. So the point being is that your family is the domestic church. When you look at the things that make a strong community, then you go and you trace this back into the individuals. What are the attributes of an individual that make up a strong community? And where does the individual develop those attributes? And it's at home, it's in the domestic church. And so our home life, quite a few of us, and modernly, we don't have a home life. We don't have a home. We are homeless. We have a house, and it's where we eat, sleep, and shower. But we don't spend time together. We don't pray together. We don't read together. We don't discuss things together. These are speaking in generalities, and to the extent you do this, thanks be to God. Because you're the exception and not the rule. I think the exception accentuates the rule. I think, too, we get extremely busy, and the busyness militates against community. It militates against the integrity of the church, even when it may seem to be, quote, good for the church. And we'll go a little bit deeper into that. So, for this talk, church and family are synonymous. Fair enough? Christ had some very interesting things to say about family. Among them were, I'll just take a few random quotes. I come with a sword, not to unite, but to divide, to set father against son, mother against daughter. That's a little bit uncomfortable, isn't it? But he said it. How about, who are my brothers and sisters? Those who keep my Father's commandments. And so constantly what he's telling us is part of this path to salvation is a path of reordering and redefining who is my family. Who are those who are that I'm on this journey with. And the reason that I bring this up is in the second phase of the Liber Christo protocol, we developed a 4-phase protocol to investigate and deal with and address extraordinary diabolical activity. The second phase is contained in a book. Our formula for that is the Liber Christo Field Manual, available by at TAN Books. Dan Snyder put it together based upon all of our exercises that we were using. So to describe what the protocol does is there are 4 phases, but there is a 0 phase, phase 0. And that's what you and the priest do together. And it's called exhausting the pastoral response. To that end, I'm giving you some references and things. Don't watch it now. Just at some point, there is a YouTube called It's Not About the Nail. Has anyone seen it? It's not about the nail. It's a clean video. Take you just, I think it's 3 minutes long. But essentially what it does is you address the obvious. And so Father, there's a reason that Father Wilson's called Father. There's a reason that we who have children in our care are called fathers. And so we'll start with the masculine role, and then we'll look at the feminine role, and then we'll look at how the domestic church comes under attack. So first of all, the masculine role. Now there was a phrase said this morning, I'm going to repeat it now, and I want you to know that it's going to sting your modern ear, but stay with me. If you do decide to leave, please, at the top of your lungs, just before you get to the door, shout heretic before you leave, okay? All right. Men and women are not equal. Remember, you have to shout loudly before. We're not equal. And so this is one of the ways that the demon militates against institutions is equivocation brings both down. It does not lift anyone up. Have you noticed that? So when we try to put equivocation in the schools, what happens to the quality of education? When we try to, anytime you use equivocation, you've got children. How many of you have children? And you treat them, every one of them exactly the same, right? You can't. You may think you do. You may extend consideration to them, but essentially you treat them differently. If you've got different plants in the garden, you treat them differently. Why? because each one has different requirements, has different needs in order for it to reach fruit, in order for it to reach perfection. And so this same process or this same concept, this is one of the universal concepts, is part of husbandry. How many of you have heard that word applied outside marriage? The practice of husbandry. Excellent. So when I went to school, dating myself, when I went to Texas A&M, I studied animal husbandry. And so what husbandry is a very specific obligation and task which brings forward perfection, but it's not by, and when I say perfection, I'm using that in a Thomistic sense, in a Thomas Aquinas sense, is to take the creature and to take it to a potential of which it's capable and of which it's intended. Fair enough? So this is one of the things that equivocation militates against, is perfection. And it only takes you to mediocrity. So the most that can be achieved is a mediocrity, not a perfection. So to look at perfection, it is a realization that men and women are different. Men do things that women can't do and shouldn't do. Women do things men can't do and shouldn't do. It is part of the symphony of creation that brings us all into this harmony that says the sum is greater than the parts. The sum is greater than the parts. I've never understood how one of the most fierce and magnificent creatures on the face of the earth wanted to be less than. Women, you can do something that is fierce. It's terrible. It's in a Thomistic sense. It's huge. It's magnificent. It is to knit flesh upon a soul. There is no higher calling for a woman than that of motherhood. This is that calling, that ability to bring forth another human. And so to see the magnitude of the blessing that is in 2 Genesis is extremely important. God blessed them, saying, "Go forth and multiply, subdue the earth and bring it under your dominion." So the twofold blessing is procreation and stewardship. And this is still the primary way in which the demon attacks us individually, as we are joined, and as institutions. So back to words mean things. How many of you remember that old show, The Beverly Hillbillies? And Jethro Bodine would come across a big word, so he'd cipher that word. You remember that? There's not a lot of ciphering to be done here, but words mean things, and they take us back to an ancient meaning. And so the husband is to do those things which provide the atmosphere where perfection can be reached. Do you ever wonder why it's called matrimony? What is the root word of matrimony? Matris, mother. It is matrimony is the office of motherhood. So our marriage is the sacrament of matrimony. And so the roles, the right roles, are the man is to provide and protect, thereby creating through husbandry an environment whereby the mother can discharge her office. What is her office? The nurturing of children, the disposition of souls to receive grace. When you hear it that way and you begin to see it that way, then you see how one can't do the other. And so the demon wants to fracture and fragment these roles, the integrity of the domestic church. And you can almost hear people thinking, well, what about broken homes? What about single parents and all of these? Understand that what I'm telling you is plan A. What I'm sharing with you is plan A. We are living plan C, D, E, L, and O, P. But know that those alternative plans are not open to and cannot convey grace the same way a functional plan A does. It's like doing plumbing. I don't know about women, but men in here, every man, because of PVC, every man in here is a plumber. Not really. We can get the water from here to there. But have you ever, for those plumbers, I apologize, but the do-it-yourselfers in here, most of us, have you ever come up with these Rube Goldberg-looking PVC structures that eventually get the water to where you want it to go? And the first thing a real plumber does when he walks in there is go, man, how'd you come up with that? And then with two pieces, he does what you did. How many have had that experience? You can use electricity, you can use any of the building trades, but to understand that the vocation of holy orders, religious life is one path. The other path is the vocation of marriage. And all grace flows into humanity through those two constructs, the construct of vocation. And both of those are forms of sacrificial theology. We're giving ourselves back to God. We're giving ourselves to God, and we're giving, more importantly, the method. We get to choose the method by which we make that sacrifice. When you look at it that way, you also start to understand that there is a perfection within the sacrifice. One of the prescriptions for sacrifice is that the offering be unblemished. Verdad, right? So many of us that are blemished, and all of us are blemished by sin, we have a methodology to reclaim purity, to reclaim, to be washed in the blood of the Lamb, to be made snow white, to be made without blemish. And so part of that obligation that happens within the home, within the domestic church, is that perfection of sacrifice, is that offering of sacrifice. So what is the primary function of both the domestic church and the church? Our primary mission is salvation. Is to dispose those souls to grace to know, love, and serve God. And for those of you who heard the Baltimore Catechism answering that, that's exactly where I'm quoting. It's to know, love, and serve God. And this is a primary function of identity, is to teach children and to raise children to know exactly who they are. So when you hear that, and what their purpose is, when you hear that, you see where society pushes that agenda another direction. Secular associations and institutions push that another direction. So we find ourselves swimming upstream in many ways, saying things that not only are unpopular, but are actually discordant with regard to the secular discourse. And we have to take account. Don't beat yourself up for what may not have been, but you're going to find that there are very, very few grandparents or people of a mature age who would advocate secular daycare or letting someone else raise your child. This is a very important thing. Is one of the functions of domestic church is the multi-generational aspect. How many of you have aged parents or others who are in nursing homes or assisted living? If at all, you can break them out, bring them home, get them in the home. Multi-generational households, it is amazing the grace that flows through that. And I know that sounds radical because we've moved away from it as a society. But when you talk to the people who are living this and have ordered their life to this, it's amazing what happens in your household if you are still in the vital part of your life, where you can provide care to the generation above and foster the generation below, provide support to the generation below. It's this understanding that as a conduit, this institution is a conduit through which grace flows, and we are beneficiaries of that multi-generational relationship. But feminism, modernism, all of these things that are spirits of the modern world get us to turn toward ourselves and focus on ourselves, and that's precisely where the demon wants us. So the church has to be ad orientem. What does that mean? It means it has to be focused on God. It has to be focused on Creator, not creature. And the same for the domestic church. We have to be focused on Creator, not on creature. Once we turn ad hominem, ad populum, and begin to focus on ourselves, now we've lost sight of God and we are vulnerable to the adversary. To give you an idea of this, if we're doing the preventative medicine with regard to diabolical influence, there is a universal principle that makes us vulnerable, and that is psychological compatibility with the diabolical, or psychological compatibility with those forces which are opposed to God's holy will, which is salvation, and all the things requisite with it. All relationship between creatures, remember that the demon is a creature. All relationship between creatures is based upon psychological compatibility. Have you noticed that? This is one of the reasons that you're having problems with certain members of your family, is you're no longer psychologically compatible with them. And if you keep going the path you're going, which I'm highly encouraging you to do, because if you're sitting in St. Mary's, Aiken, South Carolina, on a Monday night listening to this talk, then you're a fanatic. And there's members of your family that will back me up on that. And so you're in the process of reordering family. You're in the process of reordering your life. And what you're noticing, if you're of a certain age, your marriage is getting stronger and more mature because you're coming into a hearts of one accord. You're coming into a commonality and a holistic element of vision where you're seeing things the same. Thanks be to God. Now your suffering will have some merit. It doesn't mean your suffering will stop. It's just now that it'll have some merit. One of the concepts we talked about this morning, and I'll bring it up in every single talk, is self-inflicted suffering has no merit. And so when Padre Pio said, "Pray, don't worry," that's not a snappy calypso tune. It's a sound spiritual advice. It's recognize that I can go to here and give it to God, and when I give it to God, it's His. So we're going to talk some about tools of the trade tomorrow, about ways we can pray more effectively, more surgically, with greater precision, that does not only us more good, but the souls that we're praying for, it will do them more good. That'll be part of it in the morning. Back to domestic church and orientation with regard to domestic church and men's roles and women's roles. So here's the next thing, and this is one of the things that I would like to hear your feedback and get discussion on, because a lot of these things really strike our modern ear as discordant, because we're not used to hearing things this way. First of all, is to understand within the domestic church, it's no different than the universal church, than the Catholic Church. Authority and merit have nothing to do with each other. Let me say that again. Authority and merit have nothing to do with each other. Authority has everything to do with providence, and merit has everything to do with grace. So in order for grace to flow through a structure that is there by providence, it has to be open to merit. And we'll talk about what is it to increase in merit. What is merit? But first we want to talk about what is providence. In this morning's talk, we talked about God choosing the specifics of your creation. He chose, first of all, your gender. God chose that. So anytime there's an issue with regard to gender, who's being called into question? Who's being accused? God. And so the demon is very interested into this. If you take that bait, he can take you everywhere. That's a ring in the nose that he can lead you anywhere with. If you doubt God, if you think that God, if you're angry at God, God made a mistake, etc., He can get you to buy into those things. You're born into the wrong gender, the wrong ethnicity, the wrong time in history. Any of those that you buy into, those were chosen specifically by God where to send your soul, even your own parents, your family. God created all of us. Now here's the equal part. He didn't create us equal. He didn't create the angels equal. There's 9 choirs of angels, fair diamond. Each angel was created for a specific mission. We can see that in the angels. We can see it in the animal kingdom. We can't see it in ourselves. We lose that understanding. We were created very, very mission specific. Many of us went to homes that were less than exemplary, but they were precisely where God chose to send us so that salvation might be brought out of that place and through those circumstances. One of the other things the demon wants to tell you and you to bite on is that elixir of resentment. Everybody had it better than you. And so when he gets takers on that, that's the psychological compatibility that I'm talking about. The thing that he's never prepared for is self-sacrifice, thanksgiving in all circumstances. So this goes back to nature and nurture. So it is by providence that the man is chosen to lead the household. It's not by merit. And in the marriage, he is the sacrificial victim. That is what he's got to do, is pour out his life for provision and protection of the office of motherhood. Now you may say, well, she's more religious than he is. Understand that? Mary was more holy than Joseph by her nature. When you start applying this to the Holy Family, then you get some insight. Whose idea, trick question alert, whose idea was it to go to Egypt to protect the Christ child? Anyone? God, precisely. So it's his idea. Did he tell Mary? Who did he tell? Joseph. It bears out over and over and over throughout Scripture, throughout history, that authority is not by merit, it's by office. And men are born men and women are born women. If anybody should have been the spiritual director of a household, you think it should have been the Blessed Mother. But as an exemplar, she directs nothing. Do you see that? It's hard to get our heads wrapped around it, especially with our modern era. Her job is different. The mother's job is different than the father's job. And it starts way before she might think. How many of you have heard of a term called fetal imprinting? Anyone? So it's a universal concept that's within all species that essentially says the unborn are shaped by their mother. If you put it in a very practical term, the soul's first human experience is his mother's reaction to his presence. Women, you can do a lot of things, but you can't be ambivalent about pregnancy. You will have one of two reactions. It will be a positive or a negative initial reaction. And even if it's a negative reaction, it can become positive. But that is what that soul's first set of experiences are. And then from there, that soul's psyche and personality are being shaped by the mother. What is her reaction to the voice of the Father? What is her reaction to God? What is her reaction to Mass, to prayer, to the Blessed Mother? So the child is experiencing those emotions and associations long before. The child experiences the physiological response of the mother to the touch of the father. to the sound of his voice. All of that is being patterned in this child. This is the disposition to grace. And then once he's born, the child is born, then the mother begins to shape even more this soul's disposition to grace, its response to stimuli, its response to everything that's happening in the temporal world is first and foremost learned through and by and with the mother. So I'll give you a classic example. How many of you have raised, bred, and raised horses, dogs, any type of animal? So have you noticed that the disposition is 9 out of 10 times the disposition is the offspring is that of its mother? So you can go to the old nature and nurture rule, but we've raised horses for years. She carries him inside for 10 months, alongside for 6. He's going to see the world the way his mama does, for the most part. It's amazing how nurture and nature, if they are in concert, will produce a creature that is capable of interacting with the world without harm to itself or to others. And children are much the same. But if you want to raise rebellious children, be rebellious. If you want to raise critics, be critical. Even if they seemingly veer away from the parental model, it's largely a result of inconsistency. And that is going to be so key in the domestic church as well as the universal church. Just to illustrate the value of consistency is how different were the last 2 Holy Fathers. I don't care which one you like better. My question is, look at the difference. We've lost consistency. Consistency and continuity are absolutely necessary to raise a child, to raise up all of us. We need consistency. We need to be able to expect it. How many of us expect consistency from our elected officials, from the hierarchy? And this inconsistency is the recipe for angst, because you don't know. It's the not knowing. The inconsistency between discipline and punishment between parents. This is something that should be worked out at marriage prep. It has to. There are lots of these things that need to be worked out before they come down the aisle. Because if they're not worked out before they're married, they're not going to work themselves out. Have you ever noticed that ordination or marriage, neither one of these 2 official vocations, vows do not cure defects? Have you noticed that? Well, we still think they will, don't we? Once we're married, it'll change. Once he's ordained, that'll change. No, it'll get worse. It will absolutely get worse. And so this is one of the reasons that we should spend more time with regard to preparation for vocation. But that starts way back within your domestic church, within your home, where your children are raised to see priesthood and the religious life as a preferable calling to marriage. Were they seen that? Were they modeled that? Probably not, if you were the average Catholic family in the last 40, 50 years. We didn't place a premium on that. And to keep things in perspective, we're losing, and we have lost, it's coming back in some places, the value of a large family. If you were in a large family, if you grew up in a large family, you learned a really special, good lesson really early on. You're special, just like everyone else. And so there's an understanding of community and spousal. Have you ever noticed that the bigger families were, and the closer the children were together, there's less competition? Think about it. If you look at it, generally there is less sibling rivalry. The competition may be there, but it's it's a good Cyril and Methodius kind of competition that spurs each other to greater heights. There's not a resentment, there's not a combat, there's not the fewer children, the more physically combative they are, and they become, and the more closely guarded they are about possessions. And so it's going to be hard on this individual when they enter into marriage, because they're not ready to make that total gift of self without reservation. And so these are some skill sets that aid in the development of the attributes which convey grace. So I'd like to give you another tool, www.montecristo.net. And there's a lot of talks and things on there. You can go on there and register. There's a lot of free things there. One of the talks that's there, hopefully you can find it, is called The Flow of Grace. And essentially, it tracks the development of the ability to convey grace through the various stages in life. And so that's part of what I'm alluding to, is oftentimes we find ourselves trying to engage in things that we don't have the spiritual skill set for. And so go back and say, where am I finding difficulty? That cycles us back to, remember we talked about the 4-phase protocol. Phase 0 is exhausting the pastoral remedy. And so this is up to the pastor, to the spiritual father, to work in concert with the temporal father in a family, in the same way that Father Wilson works with the bishop. And so this idea of fatherhood and grace and guidance and counsel flowing down this path, it's extremely important. The demon wants to raise up this resentment. The generation gap, if you've heard that term, that's a classic example of the demon separating us from generational wisdom and how we can avail ourselves of the counsel of older generations. The demon wants to say things like, well, there's no way that those past generations, whatever they may have known, is outdated. You ever heard that? Variations on that? And especially if you can put a label to the generation. And even though there is, and we'll talk about in later talks, a zeitgeist or a spirit of the age, a generational spirit, if you will, to recognize what's operating within that generation often gives you insight into some of the wisdom. And then you look for behaviors that are indicative of a psychological compatibility or buying into, if you will, that secular spirit. That's part of fathers, whoever is doing our spiritual direction, that's part of their job. Men, you are by default the spiritual director in your home, and that should make you quake in your boots and want to run away. That's what Adam did. Didn't work out too good for him. Women, if the man's not doing it, somebody's got to do it. Somebody's got to drag these children to Mass, and that's me, by God. That's Eve. How'd that work out for her? So it's the same old shoot 'em up. What the demon wants you to say is, yeah, but my situation's different. You don't understand my particular situation. Again, it's the same old shoot 'em up. It's the same thing over and over and over again. So now we come to the merit portion of grace. It's to understand that merit and authority don't have anything to do with each other, and authority is not domination, it's dominion. So let's talk for a second about the difference between those two words. God blessed them, saying, go forth and multiply, subduing the earth and bringing it under your dominion, not domination. Domination is driving, and dominion is leading. Anybody here have experience with sheep? So a lot of people say that sheep are stupid. I grew up on a 3-species operation. We had Angora goats, we had Rambouillet sheep, and we had Hereford and Angus cattle. I like and still prefer working the sheep because they won't let you make a mistake. They trust you or they don't trust you. It's almost impossible to drive sheep. They scatter. But if they trust you, you can lead them anywhere. And it's amazing when that clicks for you in some of the agrarian references in the Gospels. The point being is the leading of the sheep through trust in them knowing you, that's dominion. To drive is domination. To force something to work against its sense of self-preservation, or out of a sense of self-preservation, because then you're descending into is what St. Thomas calls the lower faculties. And we don't make good decisions down there. One of the indicators that you are in the lower faculties is fear. Fear and trust cannot occupy the same space. And fear and merit are opposed. What is merit? Merit is being just. Joseph was the just man. And in the letter of James, it talks about the prayers of a just man are heard. What is this function of justice? It's the understanding that all justice originates in divine justice, God's justice, the justice that is due God. That there has to be a vertical orientation before there is a horizontal distribution. And I'm making that motion on purpose. There has to be a vertical orientation. That's merit to the extent that our will is disposed to God's will and we're willing to act as the sacrificial victim. We're willing to support the sacrificial victim, the willingness for women to not only support, but to nurture this idea, this understanding of sacrifice, of giving of yourself for the glory of God. That's the vertical disposition, that's merit, before there can be a horizontal disposition. We get caught up in horizontal justice and not vertical justice. Another way to put it is, if you look at reclamation theology on that Monte Cristo website, there's a daily reflection that comes out. It's a subscription service. It's like $10 a month. Highly recommend. Try it at least for a month and see where it takes you. It speaks to some of the observances, some of the things you can do in the domestic church. It follows the old calendar, but it's not a comparison of the extraordinary form and the extraordinary form. It goes well beyond that. So I don't want you to think it's a Latin Mass website or a Latin Mass promotion. For instance, for tomorrow's is a feast that's commemoration that's gone, and it disappeared before 1955, but it was there for 500 years, and it was the nuptials, the espousal of Joseph and Mary. Anybody had a clue that was tomorrow? So it disappeared. We'll talk about that. And today was a discussion on faith, hope, and charity being the daughters of Sophia. Sophia meaning wisdom. And this understanding, Thomistic understanding of mothers and daughters, and how virtue groupings have to do with the 4 mother virtues or cardinal virtues and their 64 daughters. So I'm just throwing a lot of things out there. Go and find these things and we'll talk about and discuss these things. But they're of tremendous value in building and maintaining our domestic church. So this idea of merit for the man, your merit is based upon your purity. Your ability to tell clean from unclean. This is one of the key protection elements, is the ability to tell clean from unclean. And so that ability to tell clean from unclean is based on your being clean. So us as men, for protector role, we see ourselves at 3 a.m. at the top of the stairs in boxer shorts and a ball bat. That's kind of the image we've got. Now, it's on your knees. It's in prayer. It is blessing when you go around and turn all the lights out at night, make sure all the doors and windows are locked. Pray prayers. pray over your household. Pray to remain clean, not to fall to temptation, to do what is best for your family, to orient all of your actions toward that. Women is to pray for not only your purity, but to develop a devotion to the office of your husband, not to him individually. The devotion has to be to the office, because it is through that office that God will provision and protect and provide this atmosphere that you can discharge your office, which is maternity. That's a lot. It's kind of like drinking out of a fire hose. But that's the end of the conference for this evening. Let's ask questions. If there's a concept or something that was unclear or you want more information on, let's talk about it. So to that end, does anyone have questions or comments?
I like that. My name is Bill. I just like to have
That way the question gets on the recording. Thank you.
Sure. So my name is Bill, and I just want to kind of thread a little bit on your comment about providence and also talking about large families. So in providentially, if families only blessed with 1 or 2 children, how do we reconcile that with your comment about large families and the role of those? And I'm just trying to it seems to be at odds with each other, but I just like to kind of.
So I can speak to this one from a personal standpoint. Valerie and I, my lovely wife, had planned on having a large family. We talked about these things when we were courting, was what were our expectations, what were our goals, and it was to raise a large family. We had 3, and number 3 came with some pretty significant complications. And so that was it. We had 3 close together, but that's what God blessed us with, and that was the end of those children. We're now up to 8 grandchildren. I don't think we're finished, but we're taking a break. They're taking a break. The point being is, whatever God gives you, be open to. I think that's a tough thing, is the being open, not wanting things on our own terms. And so one of the elements of being open to providence is you present yourself, and what you're given, you're given. Then you do with that what you can, the best that you possibly can. And realize that, and you might even tell your children, look, in a larger family, here are some of the things that would be, that you would be learning that you may want to work on. So for instance, in that flow of grace, the first role is son or daughter. Anybody in here not a son or daughter? Okay, great, I'm talking to everybody. So these are small shifts of perspective. So your first spiritual skill set is to receive love unconditionally. Not to receive unconditional love, to receive it unconditionally. Do you see how that small shift is whatever you get is thanks be to God? If that's the exemplar father like I had, or if that's the abusive abandonment father, still thanks be to God. Because whatever God gave you, whatever position He put you in, whatever free will of a creature acted against you, that's providence, and He's not going to shut you off from grace. That's a really important concept. We shut ourselves off when we say, my father wasn't as good as Billy's father, wasn't as good as Johnny's father, wasn't as good as... So what happens is, modernly, especially for men, the existence that men have lived in the last 70 years is, it didn't matter what a man did, it was never going to be good enough. And so there's a moving scale. There's a moving target you can't hit. And so when we say He's to receive unconditional love, we're not capable of giving it. That's one of our human faults. We can't do that. It's difficult to receive it, but we are much more able to regulate the receipt of love than we are someone else and how they give it. Does that make sense? How many times have you heard the phrase, it's not what you said, it's how you said it? Well, let's go back to it's what you said, rather than the emotional lower faculty reaction to it was how you said it. Because if I can take exception to how you said it, then I can discount the truth that's contained in the statement. You see what I mean? The next skill set is, now, what's the mother there, what the father there in an exemplary family is giving the son or daughter his presence, his provision, his protection. Being a father is not being a friend. Our children have plenty of friends. What they need is fathers and mothers. To do the hard, to do the things that are unpopular. That's the father's job. That's part of his sacrifice. Is his desire to be liked, his desire to be affirmed. Is you got to go straight down that line. And so the mother's job at this time is to dispose that soul to receive whatever love and provision is coming from the father. Whatever it is, it's adequate. Because if she's looking across the fence saying, that is a happier household than my household, then, and if she's critical, especially of the father, now grace starts to be occluded. Now grace starts to shut down. Do you see that? So she has to work on disposing her soul as well as the soul of the children. This is where we are. This is what God is giving us. This is our lot in life. It's not what we don't have, it's what we do have. It's always toward that disposition. Then we move over to sibling. And in sibling, it's to share love unconditionally. And this is where a lot of the modern breakdown is, where there's sibling rivalry, there's fighting, there's these things, is because there is a tendency to think that a parent's love has an empirical restriction on it. How many of you have multiple children? When you had the first one, you loved them with all the love you had, right? When you had the second one, where did the love for that one come from? The second child's going to tell you he didn't get it. But that's the point is God is increasing our capacity to love and give. That's what's happening. How many of you have written those mushy notes on your anniversary card? I love you now more than I ever have. How many of you have written that? Come on. I write it every year. So does that mean I was lying the year before? No. God is increasing within us the capacity to love. And so these spiritual skill sets stretch us every more and ever more and ever more. And so the spousal skill set is to desire the love of your parents for your sibling. How hard is that to hear? Because we don't do that. Very few of us do. But that's the goal, is to desire salvation for your brothers and sisters, your father and mother's love for them, even to advocate for them. That's that sibling role. Only then are you able to engage in vocation after you've gotten those two roles down. Now you're able to be in vocation. Because now it's going to require a total gift of self without reservation. Whether you're going to the priesthood, religious life, married life, it's got to be a spousal gift, a total unreserved gift of self, so that you lose yourself within the vocation. You don't exist outside the vocation. Classic example. How many of you take your wedding ring off one day a week and take a day off from being married? Anybody? Doesn't that sound ridiculous? Can't do it. Once you're a pickle, you can't go back to being a cucumber. Once you're in there, you're in there. And so it's that often what the angst is our resistance to the obligation of vocation, because we see it as a restriction, not a freedom. Does that help?
Not a question, more of a comment. Today's society, I can see parents who do a good job, and then friends, social media,
So the influence of the world, the influence of secular society is very, very difficult. So one of the things that we do is make sure that the integrity of what they receive from members of our community and from Father and from each parent, that is consistent. So I've gotten to the point now where anybody asks me a question that appears to be under 21, my first response is, who else have you asked? Because a lot of them are seeking many different inputs, and they're looking for the one person who's going to give them license. And so they'll have 5 to 10 people tell them, no, that's not a good idea. And one guy says, yeah, you should go for it. That's all they hear because that's what the license is. And so I think that first of all, is to understand that we need to, if there are youth leaders here, DREs here, please hear what I'm saying. Do not look at or listen to what Protestants are doing with their youth. You're not in competition. We are unique. We have a different relationship with each person of the Trinity. We have a different relationship with the world than all denominations, than all other religions. And to understand that you are unique. They very much want us to be like them. And in that's not the path to salvation. That's hard to hear, it's hard to say, especially you are here in the buckle of the Bible Belt. And Protestantism is loud. The point is, Catholicism is the only place there is the fullness of truth. And so it's so much easier to diminish this message than it is to build their own. So we'll talk a little bit about apologetics and other things, but to let them know that people have every reason to woo you away from this one true faith.
Hi. Sorry. Can you tell us a little bit more about your background beyond what Father said in his introduction? How did you get into this line of work, your education, stuff like that?
So you don't ever want to, never ever look at a priest and say, Father, whatever I can do to help you. This is what that looks like 25 years later. I'm not a public speaker. I never was a public speaker. The extent of my public speaking before Father Rickard asked me to start doing these missions and these talks, the extent of my public speaking was ordering a burger at Dairy Queen at the counter. So this is something that I'm not comfortable with. It's not what I set out to do. I'm a sinner. I have no qualifications other than being a sinner. I grew up in a ranching family. I was always interested in the concept of predation. How do predators work on individuals, flocks, ranches, etc. And then as a fruit of prayer about 30 years ago, 25, 30 years ago, I started to see what I thought were some similarities in the way the diabolical works and the way predators work. I shared that with a confessor. He asked if my wife and I would go and pray with some families. A family we did came back and told him our experience. And he asked if I would then go with him to pray with some families. I've always been able to see, it's not a gift, it's not any kind of thing mystical, but to see patterns of behavior that lead to consequences, etc. And so, growing up with livestock and all of those things, you see there are patterns there in everything. And so that's what I saw. And I shared that with him. When he asked if I would go with him and pray with people, I really didn't know what that meant. He was an exorcist and I didn't know it. And so then he asked if other exorcists and priests from around the country could call. And so they began to call and they would lay out a scenario and I would tell them what I was seeing as a pattern. The demon is the most closely regulated creature in all the universe. He cannot act contrary to his fallen nature. He cannot be virtuous. He cannot, he can masquerade as angel of light. St. Paul tells us that, but they're very easy to, if you just keep watching long enough, he'll give himself up. The trick is you got to watch from a safe distance. So then I begin to see, how are people vulnerable? How are families vulnerable? How does he get in? How does he do what he does? So I guess about the best way to think of it is I'm a tracker. And you don't have to see every single track. If they run boxes in this area, by the time you run 3 boxes on a course, you really don't need the beagles. You don't need the hounds. You know where he's going to run, how he's going to run. You know the paths he's going to take. And so they're extremely predictable. The diabolical are extremely predictable. And so begin to share that knowledge, begin to work with exorcists around the country. And started working with Father Ricker about 15 years ago, a little better than 15 years ago. So hopefully that's...
Predator looks for the weak, the sick, and the young. You just told us a little bit about protecting and doing things for the young. Spiritually, will you be this week telling us anything about how we deal with our own spiritual weakness or sickness to not be easily preyed upon by the predators?
Hopefully the whole week will have bits and pieces of that. So tonight your takeaway is, you're right, he will go after the weak, the crippled, the young. It's the same from a spiritual standpoint. So who are the spiritually crippled? Who are the spiritually weak? Who are the spiritually young, defenseless? And how do we maintain defenses? So from a man's standpoint, your first obligation is purity, the ability to tell clean from unclean, and then to see what is a clear and present danger, what is a threat. So to develop a perimeter and that perimeter is spiritual practices. We're going to talk about that tomorrow, tools of the trade. What are the ongoing devotions? What are the things that I can do within my domestic church to put up fences, keep the fences up? So there's a perimeter. And then there is daily routines, weekly routines, monthly routines, things that we should be doing on a regular basis. That's the liturgy that I'm speaking of. Modernly, we understood, and seasonally there are things to do. Anciently, we understood that liturgy was all the work of the church, including the Mass. Modernly, when we hear liturgy, we simply think of the Mass. We may extend it to some of the other sacraments, but traditionally, liturgy was all the things. It was the prayers of the people. It was the action of the people. It was what we did as a community to follow God. And in following God and pursuing holiness, then it's a whole different battlefield. It's a whole different engagement. Modernly, we find ourselves caught up in simply in surviving. So we're going to conquer nothing if we're trying to simply survive. It needs to go beyond that. And so there has to be a movement from the avoidance of sin to get past the avoidance of sin in order that one can pursue holiness. So we need to be, first of all, a fully occupying army, and we're not. We need to be a fully occupying army, then we can be a conquering army. And so we have to be able to occupy the ground that we take, so to speak. So when we feel these spiritual movements within us and we go to these missions or retreats or have a spiritual experience, then you have to be able to defend the ground that you've taken, the advancement you've made. That's done through devotions, through practice, through liturgy. in a daily, weekly, monthly, seasonally, all of those things. And the ancient calendar was very aware of that. The modern calendar is very stripped down with regard to that. Hopefully that addressed it. I can't hear, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. There's an air handler moving back here, and
Yeah, that was probably a not man question. That is, if you think you might be getting lost, stop and ask for directions.
I still didn't hear it. Someone rephrase what he's saying.
He said he didn't ask a manly question. Because the manly question.
There's a manly voice. There's a manly voice.
A woman will stop and ask for direction. A guy just keep right on flying and no.
Largely that's true. Largely that's true. Is a man won't ask for directions. The whole point being is that it's up to the man to lead. Do you think the Blessed Mother told Joseph how to get to Egypt? I think she's the example. How many times women have you been in that car where that guy's lost, and you firmly resolved, I will not correct it? How many have done that? Were you able to do it?
Okay, maybe one more question.
Yes, I was on your on the website montecristo.net, and there are some wonderful YouTube videos. You're in a number of them. There are other presenters. You know what your analogy about being fed through a fire hose was right on. I don't know if you're self-taught, if you have a degree in theology, but your knowledge of the confessors and like Thomas Aquinas, early brilliant theologians in the church, and weaving it into our daily, how in our daily lives. There's so many things that I find that if I daydream for a couple of seconds, I've missed something important. I'd like to be able to pick this thread up again and make it more a part of my armor. My question is, how much of the things that you're presenting during this week are on that website?
So it's a good question. Everything that you're going to hear mentioned this week, there are bits and pieces on the website. It goes deeper into certain topics. There are certain treatments. These talks aren't found in this form on the website, but there will be talks on the virtues, talks on the flow of grace, various other things that are there. And so I think that and there's not a particular order. Just go and let the Holy Spirit kind of guide, and if you get into a particular area and you have a lot of interest, you can email questions, or you can just continue to exhaust what's there, and it kind of cross-references. But just wherever you walk in, that's where it's kind of like sitting down in the middle of those old westerns. You know what's going to happen. You can sit there and watch till you came in. So.
But you say you went to Texas A&M, you're an Aggie, I guess, and you learned animal husbandry and agriculture, and obviously you're a rancher. Where did you pick up all of the knowledge that you have of the church, theology and church history?
So I'm a one-trick pony. This is all I do. This is all I've ever been interested in. So I was fortunate enough to grow up in a family that placed a high value on Scripture. And so Scripture and the patristics, those type of things, I heard my father and my uncles, my grandfather, these are the things they discussed. And so they were not theologians. They were not, my grandfather was not, he never went past 6th grade. But these were the things that they were interested in, and it's what they talked about. And so you talk about how you form a child. All I ever wanted to be was a cowboy, and they were my definition of cowboys and virtuous men. And I had exemplars for role models, and that's all I ever wanted to be. And so it became natural to read through those things, and I started to make connections. And when the Catechism of the Catholic Church came out, I wore out 3 of those. But that's all I did, because it was all I was interested in. And so then when you start working in this, you'll find that the demon doesn't engage in speculative theology. He has no place for that other than how it might distract you. But he will either yield or he will not yield. It's all functional theology. And when you hear the demons quoting the church fathers out of the mouth of a person who is all but illiterate or maybe illiterate, there's no way they know what they're saying. But when the priest says certain things and does certain things in the rite of exorcism and the demon reacts, I would go to, okay, who are the church fathers that wrote about this particular thing? And that's how I came to be the steward of this knowledge. It all belongs to the church, and it's all out there. There's nothing mysterious there. But everything that I've ever heard from the mouth of possessed people and from people who are afflicted by the diabolical just gives testimony to our faith and what the church fathers said and what the apostles said. So I came at it that way.
Thank you. One last question. My favorite saint is Joseph, and I've heard him referred to as terror of demons. Is that something that you heard in one of his titles, one of his many titles?
You're saying St. Joseph?
St. Joseph.
Yes, absolutely, one of his titles. And so one of the things to think about is when you look at the litanies, this is another part of the liturgy that we've lost, is we used to pray the litanies quite often. Some of you are of an age that you'll remember that on Marian Feast we would have the Litany of Loretto, and it would be chanted in the church. And so these litanies are not limited, they're not prohibited. So one of the resources on that website is a group of super novenas. We'll actually start tomorrow on the espousal of Joseph and Mary. We'll start the novena to the presentation. And so if you want a super novena to that, you can go to montecristo.net and email info. They'll send you a PDF in a printable form. And then it's what we call super novenas, but included in the liturgy. Litany. All that by way of saying is whenever you say a litany, there is a ranking. And so the most prestigious and primary titles will come first, and then in diminishing titles. So St. Joseph, Terror of Demons, comes at about a third of the way down the litany to St. Joseph. It's not the opening. But that's one of his titles, is Terror of Demons. And again, his terror, the reason he was Terror of Demons is he was the just man. He was the man who would be king. He was next in line to the Davidic monarchy. Had they been tracking and instituting the Davidic monarchy, we know a lot more about him than we think we do. If you go back into the Golden Legend, you go back into tradition, you go back into constant veneration. For instance, how many of you know that the path to Egypt is documented and has been those stopover sites? There's 25 known sites, 9 of which have churches or monasteries where the Holy Family was during their 4-year sojourn in Egypt. How many of you know that? These are treasures of our faith that we don't know. Those sites were largely cut off to us for a lot of the history of the world. But the Coptics and the Syrians and all of these preserved those sites. They were never not in veneration. And so these are important things. But yes, he is known as Terror of Demons, and quite often he does intercede in certain cases. Very strong intercessor. Doesn't say much. It was a little joke. You done? Oh, great. Thank you.
I had a couple of announcements, if you want to go with that before you go. Some of y'all may have noticed the time was incorrect in the bulletin for the morning session. So we have schedules in the back you can pick up, or you can take a picture of them and have them on your phone. Also, I have RCIA tomorrow, so if anybody here would be interested in attending the video for me, that would be great. Come see me after the talk. And coincidentally, not really of course, I am going to be leading a presentation on a week from Saturday, which is February 3rd, on the domestic church. And it's about, the bulletin says, come learn how to live a church year in your home life and to share the faith in creative and fun ways. So I have there, it'll be on the banner in the, it should be on the banner in the parish website, and you can look there for more information. There is childcare, but you have to let us know you're going to bring a child. So tell all of your friends with children. Okay.
Just a couple of things again. Kyle, thank you so much for coming to share your wisdom and your life with us. We appreciate that so much. So, a few things. Please pray for the parish mission. This is a parish mission to help prepare St. Mary Help of Christians for the Lenten season that is fast approaching upon us. The second thing is look around. There's still some spaces in the pews. And think about and pray about who you might invite that might be blessed by this evening, and the next talks in the morning and evenings. And in the back, there's a couple of bases. Well, I guess there's one on each side. If you feel led to contribute to defray the costs of this parish mission, please put some things in those beautiful vases. Thank you so much. The Lord be with you. The Almighty God bless you, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Go in peace.